All right, good evening, everyone, and welcome to Genealogy, using newspapers to research your ancestors. So before we get going here, just a couple of items of business. We acknowledge that the Boston Public Library's Central Library stands on land that was once a water-based ecosystem, providing sustenance for the indigenous Massachusetts people, and is a place which has long served as a site of meeting and exchange among nations. We are committed to land acknowledgements for all locations at which we operate. We reaffirm this commitment to set the context for our planning. Deliberations and public engagement will take place from the spirit of welcome and respect found in our motto, free to all. There we go. So for those of you who haven't been to one of my programs before, I am Jessie Wheeler. I am the genealogy specialist here at the Boston Public Library, and I work in the Research Services Department. Just a couple of items before we get to the main part of the presentation. This class is being recorded, and I will be sending a link to everyone who is registered for the class once the recording is ready. You will also be getting a follow-up email from me tomorrow that includes links to the handout, the chat transcript, as well as the slides from this presentation. So if you miss anything, don't have to worry, you're going to be able to get everything. And for those of you who haven't been able to get to the handout yet, I'm putting a link to it in the chat now. And the chat is open, so go on ahead. If you want to say hi or if you have any questions, feel free to put it in there. We will have plenty of time for questions once my presentation is over. Here we go. So today we are covering newspapers. More specifically, we're going to go over some things that are good to know just in general about using newspapers for genealogy. Then we're going to talk about using newspapers on microfilm, how to find an obituary. We're going to talk about accessing newspapers in databases, and we're going to take a look at, in real time, at how some of them work. And we're going to look at how to find an obituary in a database. We're going to look at some other online resources for newspapers outside of BPL databases. Then we're going to go over just a few of the things that you can find in newspapers aside from obituaries. So right off the bat here, the BPL does not have newspapers.com. That is one of the most popular ones now. It gets very confusing because it is connected to ancestry.com, which we do have, but we do not have newspapers.com. That's on a higher tier of subscription that we do not have, unfortunately. The other one we don't have is America's Historical Newspapers. That we did used to have that, but the vendor decided to no longer work with us, so we no longer have it. Excuse me. Sorry about that. We do have lots of other ones, including a few in ProQuest Historical Newspapers. We do not have the entirety of ProQuest Historical Newspapers. Our access is limited only to the Boston Globe, the Irish Times, the Jewish Advocate, and the New York Times. That is what we have. There are some places that will have complete access to the whole database. We do not. So that's just one more thing to keep in mind. So just in general, when you're searching, you don't want to just look at one newspaper. You may have to look at multiple newspapers to find what you're looking for about the person you're researching. Another important thing to consider is that not every city or town is going to have a newspaper that was in publication at the time you're researching. So this is particularly true for smaller towns. Not every town has a newspaper. So what you might need to do is try researching a newspaper that was nearby. So for a smaller town, you would probably want to try searching for the biggest city nearby, because chances are they'll have a section devoted to that town, or they'll cover news from that town. Or there may have just been a county newspaper. That's where I'm from, Berkshire County. We have the Berkshire Eagle, so that covers the entire county. Another thing to keep in mind, aside from location-specific newspapers, there's a lot of newspapers published by and for specific groups or ethnicities. For instance, we have a pretty strong collection in Albanian newspapers here at the BPL. So those can be useful things to search if your ancestor was a part of a specific group that might have had a newspaper. But the caveat with that is you would need to keep in mind that they may be published in another language. So they're truly only useful if you either can speak or read the language that it's published in, or if you know someone who can, that can translate for you. Along those lines, particularly for people from other countries who weren't native English speakers, names may be spelled wrong. I'm researching a question right now for someone who was Armenian, and their name is spelled 5 different ways, at least, that the person told me to look. So it's been kind of tough to find. So that's something you want to keep in mind. Another thing, and we're going to get more into this later, sometimes women, particularly during certain time periods, will be referred to only by their husband's name. So you can't look by their name. If you're looking for in a certain time period, you want to look for their husband's names. Now, and we all know today this can be the case, but for all time, not everything in a newspaper is guaranteed to be true, even obituaries. People make mistakes. People might misremember things, or people purposefully might have said something that wasn't true. Who knows? But you don't want to take something in a newspaper as your only source for a specific fact, and this is true for pretty much any resource. You want to make sure you have good evidence for a fact about a person. Another thing to keep in mind, and this is going to be particularly true if there was a large bequest or the person was prominent in some way, your ancestor still could have been mentioned in a newspaper even after they've passed away. And for instance, a lot of the time when someone dies, they might be referred to as the spouse of the late so-and-so. Again, I was just researching something here where I found an obituary for a man, and it mentioned that the name of his wife who had predeceased him by a few years. That's something else to keep in mind. Sometimes that's the only way I've been able to find out that someone actually passed away by a certain date, because their passing was mentioned in their spouses or other relatives' obituary. So now we're going to check out newspapers on microfilm. For those of you who have been here, who were here before COVID lockdown, this is what the area looked like where you looked at your microfilm on scanners. They're in a different room now, but the machines are still the same. This is what we use to scan microfilm. We put the reel over here, and then the picture comes up on the screen. I think it's pretty cool. So before we keep going, this is just a personal pet peeve of mine, and I'm trying to correct this error wherever I can. What you see on the left is microfilm. It is film that goes around a spool. What you see on the right is microfiche. Those are little rectangular sheets. It's the same basic technology and material, but they are 2 different things. You say microfiche, this is what you're talking about. You are not talking about this. It's a very common mistake that we get, and like I said, just trying to correct that so folks will stop calling everything microfiche. I realize it's kind of silly, but I want to try to get that out there as much as I can. Okay, so newspapers on microfilm. The BPL has a substantial collection of newspapers on microfilm. We have listings for all of them in our newspaper research guide, which we're going to take a look at in a little bit, and a lot of them will also be in the online catalog. So our holdings are primarily from Massachusetts, but we also have newspapers on microfilm from all over the world. And admittedly, it's going to be primarily the English-speaking world, and we also have a lot of newspapers. We have a few newspapers from France and Germany and a few other places. However, from 2008, 2009 to the present, those of you who were around back then know we had a big recession that year, so our subscriptions got cut substantially. So since about that time, the only newspapers we will still get on microfilm are the Boston Globe and the Boston Herald. And the other newspapers, even if they're still in publication, we will not have them on microfilm past 2008 or 2009, which is very unfortunate, but said it was due to budget cuts from back then. So microfilm is for in-library use only. We will very rarely loan it out for interlibrary loan. And you do have to request it at the Research Services Desk, which is located on the 2nd floor of what we call the McKim building, which is the pretty older building built in the 19th century. And we are in the Washington room, so named for the gigantic portrait of George Washington. You do have to have a physical library card with the BPL to request microfilm. You do not have to live in Massachusetts. Anyone who walks in the door of the BPL can get either a library card or a research card, and that will allow you to use any material in the building. So if you're coming to visit us, from out of state, you don't have to, you can still get a research card and use microfilm while you're here. So as we saw in the picture a little while ago, the microfilm readers are attached to computers and they're also scanners. We do still have printing. It's 20 cents per page per side for black and white, 60 cents per side for color. However, we recently instituted a new system where everyone gets $20 free printing every month. So if you're not going to go over that, then you might not have to pay for any copies ever, depending on how much you're printing. However, even though we do have free printing, scanning your images and saving it to, for instance, to a flash drive is always free. And it's also, to be perfectly frank, the easiest option. Those of you who may have been in to use this service before probably know what I'm talking about. I will just say printing is a bit of a complex process. You do have to have a library card or a printing account to do it. If you are coming in, I highly recommend coming in with a flash drive. It is the easiest way to save images. Okay, so because obituaries are the most popular items that we look for in newspapers, I'm going to go over quickly how to find an obituary, just in case you haven't done that before. So first off, the most important thing you're going to need is the name of the person you're looking for, their exact date of death, and the location of their death. You need to have all of this information. If you don't have this information, you need to find it before you can find an obituary. If you don't know the exact death date, you can request a death certificate from, in Massachusetts, it would be the city or the town clerk's office, or in Boston, the registry division at City Hall. The death certificate will have the date of death on it. But once you have all that, assuming you have all that information, what you want to do first, you can check out the newspaper's research guide, which we also have in a big, thick binder at the desk, so you can actually just leaf through it in paper format if that's what you'd prefer. Hopefully this will load for us. There we go. So this is our newspaper's research guide. You would want to click over here to Historical Newspapers Microfilm. And you'll see here links to all the different lists that represent the big, thick binder we have. We have different lists for Boston newspapers, Massachusetts newspapers, US newspapers, and a few other categories. So you're going to check that out, see if we have a newspaper that covers the time and place you're looking for. Away. And then you'll go on to the next step. So once you have a newspaper that you think you might want to look at, you're going to come to see us in Research Services. Oh, I need to change that on the slide. I'm sorry. It's in the Washington room. That's what it should say. Then you're going to fill out a request slip for the microfilm that you're looking for. Then we're going to go get the film and we'll set you up on the machine. We'll show you how to use it. You'd look for the obituary in the film. If you find it, print or save the results. And if you're having trouble, you're going to ask us for help. So just as an example, we're going to go through. This is my grandmother. So as I said before, women are oftentimes referred to only by their husband's names. So her name, so it's important to know the maiden name and the married name just in case they're published under one or the other. So my grandmother's maiden name was Jeanette Ann Archie. Her married name was Mrs. William F. Herman. That was my grandfather. So she died on November 1st, 1968 in Pittsfield, Massachusetts. So first, I would look in that list for Pittsfield and see if we have any newspapers covering 1968, and I can see here that we do. That's the Berkshire Eagle, and we have it from 1956 to 2008. So I'm going to fill out one of these slips. These are our call slips. So this is what you would use to request microfilm or any other material that we have to retrieve for you. This is also what you would use at the book delivery desk to get items from the closed stack. So you would write down the call number here, the name of the newspaper you're looking for, and the date. So because it was November 1st, we're going to want to look for November 1968. If, for instance, If you're looking for someone who died towards the end of the month, you might want to request the beginning of the next month too, because it was very rare for things to be posted to be published that quickly. It might take a few days. So if she, for instance, if she had passed away at the end of October, I would probably request October and November just to cover my bases there. And then down here, you'd write your library card number and your name. You'd give the slip to one of us and we'll go get it for you. And this is, for instance, what you're going to find here. So this is a very rare instance where an obituary for someone was published the same day that she died. That is incredibly rare. And I can tell you just from what my mother has told me, this is because it was very, very early in the morning when she passed. So they were able to get it into the newspaper before the end of the day. That's the only reason it was in there. In most cases, you're not going to find it until the soonest would be the day after, or even like 2 or 3 days after, depending. So, as we can see here, the headline of her obituary is indeed as Mrs. W.F. Herman. It's not as Jeanette Herman. It's W.F., which is my grandfather. But however, it does list her under her maiden name in the beginning as Jeanette Archie Herman. So that's why it's useful to have the names of everything, of both names for married women, to have their maiden name and their married name. It can be very useful. Sometimes you'll get a mixture like here. Sometimes you'll just get the married name. Okay, so that's how to get it on microfilm. So I was very lucky. I found hers right away. Again, this was really unusual. Most of the time we have to look through a few days to find it. So don't be thinking you're going to get this lucky. It doesn't happen that often. All right, now we're going to talk about newspapers and databases, which is getting more and more easy to do as more newspapers are digitized. However, not everything is digitized. Once again, you can find a listing of newspaper databases that we have. You can find that on our website. And we're going to look at a few of these in a bit. I just want to show you this really quickly. This is something we just added this week, I think, which is the Alternative Press Index. That's pretty cool. You can see here, these are all of the databases we have that have newspapers in them. It's quite a lot. So we're not going to look at all of these for today. We're just going to look at a few, but I encourage you, if you have access to field databases, to definitely look through these on your own just to get a feel for them. So you can use either, if you have a physical full service card, if you live in the state, or you can use an e-card. So you do have to live in Massachusetts in order to access this. You can't access our databases through us if you don't live, work, go to school, or own property here. So that's unfortunate, but that's licensing issues. We have agreements with our vendors. We can't offer access to people outside of Massachusetts, unfortunately. Also, not all databases are available for remote access, but that will be noted in each one. As you look at the description, it'll tell you whether or not you can access it from home. So the ones that get used most often for genealogy research, at least that I think are most useful, are 19th century US newspapers, the Boston Globe, I need to update that too, sorry, My Heritage Library Edition, and the Newspaper Archive, pardon me. So we're going to now go over how to find an obituary in a database. So again, like with finding an obituary in microfilm, you want the person's name, date of death, and location of death. You want to have that information already. Then, just like with microfilm, you're going to look at the list of newspaper databases to see which one would be the most appropriate to look for. And you're going to log into the database, then go to advanced search. You're going to enter your name and the death date or close to it in there. Click search and look through the results. If you find it, you can save it or print it. If you can't find it, you can ask us for help. You don't have to be in the building. You can send us an email. So we're going to do in one example here. If anyone knows who this gentleman is, feel free to post that in the chat. So this is John Francis Fitzgerald. He was a resident of Boston who passed away on October 2nd, 1950, and he lived in Boston. So now we're going to take a look here. Let me see. Okay, let's zip on back over here. So he died in Boston in 1950. So we're going to look through here, see which database would be appropriate. So we have the Boston Globe full coverage from 1872 to 1991. So we're going to want to look here. All right, he was a relative of John Kennedy. So Fran has that right, but if anyone knows what his nickname was, he has a very famous nickname. Go ahead and pop that into the chat if you remember his nickname. All right, Honey Fit, there we go. Yep, Honey Fitz. Yes, he was a former mayor of Boston. He was also in Congress, and most importantly for most people, he is the maternal grandfather of John F. Kennedy and also consequently his siblings. All right. All right, so we're going to pop the month and the year in here. When you're in advanced search and you pick a specific date, the most you need is a year. You don't have to have a month and or a day, but since we know the month that he died, we can put that in there. So for a name as common as John Fitzgerald, it's going to be a little tough to find it. So we're going to try with his full name and see if that comes up with it. See what happens there. And there we go. So if you were just for fun, if we just put in John Fitzgerald, we're going to get more results there. So here you'll find a whole bunch of art because he was a very prominent person. You're going to get a lot more articles about him rather than just an obituary, but this is in essence how you would find an obituary. If you're searching for someone with a common name, I would suggest you can see here how I put it in quotes. Otherwise, you're going to get all the Johns and all the Fitzgeralds. There were a lot of them in the 50s. There's probably a lot of them now. So we're going to put his name in quotes. And here we go. There's a lot about it. So let's just pick one of these to look at here. And here we go. So there were many articles about his death. And this, again, because someone like him, they're going to get a nice long write-up. Not everyone's going to get that. Most people will just get a few paragraphs. So this is how basic searching works. There are, of course, other things you can find aside from obituaries in here. We're going to talk about that a little later, but let's go back here. So yes. So anyway, yes, that is what we found there. So once again, if you need information about newspapers we have, you can go to the BPL research guide. But for now, we're going to just take a look at a few more of these databases. So like I said, we're not going to look at all of them. So we've looked at the Globe. The Globe, that was one of the ProQuest ones. So if you were to look at the New York Times, the Irish Times, or the Jewish Advocate, it's the same search function. So we're going to take a look next at 19th century U.S. newspapers. So this, again, is exactly what it sounds like. It has 19th century U.S. newspapers. And it has several newspapers in here from Boston. The biggest one I believe it has is the Boston Advertiser, which was actually, a pretty prominent newspaper at the time. So let's say we want to find more articles so Fitzgerald was around for a long time. So let's say we want to find information. Let's try putting his initials in there. Okay, so let's say we don't really care about dates, but we do want to restrict it by publication city. So we can scroll down here and click on Boston. So this is a little unusual in that they have a checklist that you check on. You don't just type things in. You have to click on a section. So we're going to see what's happening and what's mentioned for him. Here we go. So one of the coolest things about this website, why I like it, you can click here where it says keyword preview, and it'll open up a little section here that will tell you that will show you your highlighted results. So you don't have to open the article in order to see whether or not it's the right person. So we can see here, this is a search on a Fitzgerald, so that's not who we're looking for. So we're just going to keep on looking here. So we can see here, this is 1880. I believe that's about when he would have graduated from school, so that might be him. So we just keep on looking here. So I just picked him because he was a famous example. So you just keep on looking here and see who, see what the results are. So you can see here, this is him. This is when he was elected, one of his early election wins in 1894. So we know that is our guy. So this is a good example of the sort of thing you can find about people other than obituaries. For politicians, you can find out election results. For more ordinary people, as we saw up here, you can see when they graduated from school. Oftentimes graduation lists were put in here. So you could see, when did your ancestor graduate from school? What school did they go to? A lot, particularly in the 19th century, early 20th century, they would list everyone who graduated from a particular school that year. And if they list colleges, sometimes it'll tell you what kind of degree they had. So that's just one example of something you can find other than an obituary in a newspaper. That's 19th century US newspapers. The next one we're going to take a look at is newspaper archive. So this one has a pretty wide swath of newspapers from New England, primarily New England and specifically Massachusetts. So we want to look for our guy again, and we want to restrict it to Boston this time. So again, we're just going to see what comes up for him here. Oops. Typo. Okay, so let's just pick a year, actually, for the heck of it. So we can pick 1900. So let's see what we have. So this one, it doesn't have that cute little keyword preview, unfortunately. So we do have to click onto that to see what it is. So you click on that. And it will open another window or another tab. Okay, and sometimes this happens where it says it can't find the results, even though it said it was there. So what we're going to do is up here on the upper right-hand corner, we're just going to narrow that down to Fitzgerald and see if it can find that. And there it can. Okay. Oh, sorry about that. Okay, there we go. Now we're back. Okay, so it looks like it actually found a bunch of other Fitzgerald and not the one that we are looking for. But this is in general how it works. It's a little tricky. It can be a little glitchy. You have to click and drag the page around. It's not the easiest interface, though it can have a lot of good information. This is why this is good, is this has the Morning Globe, whereas it has a different edition of the Globe than what is in ProQuest. So you'll have a little bit more coverage of the Globe if you're looking in there. The big one it has that we like using is the Boston Post. We have that in there from 1831 to 1922. So that is really good. That's the main one that we wind up using in there. They also have newspapers from Connecticut, Delaware, Maine, Washington, D.C., New Hampshire, New Jersey, Rhode Island, and Vermont. So it is the Northeast. So if you're researching anyone in the Northeast, you can definitely use this one. The last one we're going to take a look at here, and scroll down, is My Heritage Library Editions. So why this one is cool is because a lot of the Boston newspapers in here were ones that were digitized from the Boston Public Library's collection. So it is, however, a little tricky to use. It is also a general genealogy database. You can search for other records such as birth, death, and marriage records, census lists, and various other things, but the newspaper collection is particularly strong. It is, however, a little hard to search through. So I will say the keyword search function does not really work. Not sure why they have it there. It just has never worked anytime I've tried to use it. So when you do want to search this one, you just pop in the name there. So because this was a really common name, you're going to get a lot of results, and you'll even get stuff on the Kennedy family because there's also some books and things in here. So it's going to pull up all sorts of people. So if we're specifically looking for newspapers, then we're going to go down here, click on newspapers, and we're going to go over here, click on Massachusetts. So then we can further narrow it down by title, year, and place. So let's say I want to do the Herald. And let's say if I want to see if what they published when and they don't have it from the year he died, but we'll just let's do 1939 for the heck of it. And there we go. So there were still 82 results. They were not necessarily all our guy. They have a kind of a preview here. It's not perfect. Let's just see. Okay, let's just look at this one. So you click on this one. It does not open up in a new tab. It opens up in the same window. And it should zoom into your highlighted result here. And there it is. Oh, so there's a couple more tips I have for this one. The image doesn't always load automatically. If you see that happening, just hit refresh a few times. It will eventually come up. It might take a while. You might have to do it a lot, but it will eventually come up. I promise. I have to do it all the time. So my other tip is if you do want to print it, don't try to print it from here. If you try to print it from here, you'll just get this section here with the text and a little bit of the image. If you want to print the newspaper, or if you want to save it, you want to click where this little box here, that will open it into full screen. And then you can click on the little printer icon there, and then that will print the whole page for you. It won't print the search result page. I'm not sure why it's like this. It's a little clunky, but there are just so many great newspapers in there that it's definitely worth all the trouble and the glitches to try to find stuff, because there's a lot of good stuff in there. There we go. So there, you'd be able to print the whole page that way. Okay. All right, so that is newspaper. That is my heritage. So those are just, that's what we can get through the BPL. We do have another, more information about looking for obituaries. It is it is the most common thing we get asked for newspapers in genealogy. So we have another guide for that, which again, there's a link to that in the handout. I'll pop a link to that for everyone there. Okay, so everything there. Yes, it did. So now we're going to talk about a couple of other online resources for newspapers outside of the BPL. So the first one we're going to take a look at is from the Library of Congress. It's called Chronicling America, Historic American Newspapers. So what they have are images of historic newspaper pages that cover from 1770. So that's just prior to the beginning of the Revolutionary War up to 1963. They also have the U.S. Newspaper Directory. So this is a good way to determine whether or not a newspaper existed for a time and place that you're looking for. Because our list will just tell you whether or not we have something. That doesn't tell you that a newspaper existed. So if you can find out that a newspaper existed, and if we don't have it, we can try to help you figure out who does have it. I'm going to take a look at this. So they have a 100 years ago today feature, so you can always just look through that. They have them from all over the country. If you're looking for specific pages, you want to click on advanced search. So let's say we want to look up Massachusetts. And yeah, it's being a little weird right now. Okay, so let's just see what they have for 1770. For Massachusetts. Okay. Oh, no, that's not what we wanted to do. So yeah, the search function is a little clunky here. Pardon me. Okay, so yeah, let's just, oh, there we go. Okay, so let's see. This will work for us now. There we go. So now there's only 58 results. So this is the Massachusetts Spy, which was a pretty important newspaper prior to the Revolution. You can click on that image here, and this is an image of the newspaper. So you can see here, this actually, you can tell by this little stamp here, this also came from us. We're a big contributor to this project. And best of all, this is completely free. You don't have to log in. You don't have to register for an account. This is completely free through the Library of Congress. There's a lot of really cool stuff on here. Like I said, now the other useful tool that they have here is a U.S. newspaper directory. So you can figure out whether or not anything was even published for a time period you're looking at. So again, if we're going back to the example of my grandmother, we'll click on Massachusetts. You can narrow it down by county. However, you'll notice here, sometimes it's misspelled, so make sure you pick the right one. I'm not sure why those are still in there. But we're just going to go by county. And let's see if I can get... Okay, so let's just say 1960 to 1970. And there we go. So let's see what the directory says. Okay, so these are all the newspapers that they think were in publication in the 60s in Berkshire County. So this is something that you're still going to need to double check on because they don't always know when a newspaper ceased publication. But I'm going to tell, so this will give you some idea of what may have been around back then. Okay, so, all right, so Sylvia, can you just be a little bit more specific? Which database were you trying to do that search in? And we'll get back to that. So this is the directory. Again, this is how you can figure out whether or not a newspaper was even published, and then we can help you try to find it. So another excellent free resource is Google News Archive. Yes, Google actually is useful sometimes. So this is their newspaper archive. As you can see here, they have newspapers going back into the 19th century. And again, completely free. You can just you can just click on these and look at them. So let's say we want to look at, all right, let's do Adams County News. So you can click on that there. So they may not have every single issue that was published, but you can browse through here. You can type in a year. So let's go to 1915. Let's see. There we go. So then you can look at 1915. So again, these are just the issues that they could scan. It's probably not every issue that was published, but you can look and see what they have. You can do a text search. Just make sure if you do a text search, you click on search archive, not search the web. But search the web, you're just using regular Google. So you want to make sure you stay in the archive. So just for the heck of it, let's do our guy here again. There we go. So I did just what there we go. So here we go. It's going to come up as books for some reason. That's just how it comes up, but these are the newspapers. So one of the bigger ones that they have in here is the Boston Evening Transcript, which was prior to the Globe being published, it was considered the newspaper of record for Boston. So it is a pretty important newspaper to take a look at before the Globe was published. Chances are you're going to find what you're looking for in the transcript. They also had a genealogy column, which is sometimes useful, sometimes not. But that is one of the more impressive things that they have in here. So again, Sylvia, I'm going to need to know which website you were looking at. Was it the Boston Globe database, or was it our website? I'm going to need you to be a little bit more specific about where you were searching. Okay, newspaper archive, was that what you were looking for? Is that what it was? Okay, so again, I don't know which database you're referring to. Okay. Oh, so the Library of Congress database. Okay. Was it this one? Yes. Okay. All right. So yeah, the search function is not the greatest thing. Searching on quotes doesn't work very well here. I generally would recommend browsing by date rather than trying to do a search because the search function is incredibly clunky. That's just the way it's kind of built. It's not perfect, but it's really still really cool. So this is again something that's a little bit more useful if you have a really good idea of the date and could just kind of browse around. Sometimes the keyword search will work. A lot of the times it doesn't. That's just been my experience. So that's one thing to keep in mind with all of these, particularly the free resources. They're not perfect. There's going to be caveats with all of them. There is no perfect search function. There's some pretty good ones, but most of them will have their flaws, no matter which one you're looking at. Okay. So we've touched on this a little bit, but there's a lot more you can find that will mention your ancestors in newspapers other than obituaries. So, for instance, you can find engagement, wedding, and anniversary announcements. These can be pretty fun, especially if you're looking at a wedding announcement and has a full description of what the bride was wearing. I'd loved reading through these for my grandmother and my mother. I got a really good description of my grandmother and my mother's wedding dress, which was nice because they don't exist anymore, so I could get a good idea of what they looked like, those wedding dresses. The other interesting things you might have is if someone you're researching died in a way that was considered interesting. So if it was a really bad car wreck or a train crash or something like that, there might be more detailed articles about that incident. If your ancestor was involved in a crime, either they committed a crime or they were the victim of a crime, there might be articles about that. The other thing that's really fun, I think, is society news, which is what they basically call gossip. So particularly, in what we call the Gilded Age or around the turn of the century, you might have information about travel, like such and such is visiting such and such in New York or Chicago. Such and such is having a visitor from whoever. You'll have information about debutante balls and also just general gossip, which can be fascinating, I think. It's really interesting what people thought about or was worthy of being put in the newspaper. I just love just looking through those sometimes. Just for fun. It's just really entertaining. I highly recommend looking through those. So kind of related to that is you might also find information about activities that your ancestor was involved in. For instance, if they played in a sport, particularly if they were played in a sport in high school and they were really good at it. I found a lot of articles about people for their relatives were made all state or all American teams. So there's a lot of articles about them and pictures. Or if someone was involved in charity work, a lot of a lot of local newspapers would report on, different charitable societies, whenever they had a big fundraiser, they would always mention who was in charge of the event, who were the officers of the group, and all that kind of stuff. You can also find articles that were related to your ancestor's job or where they worked. So, for instance, we have John Fitzgerald, who was the mayor of Boston and also in Congress. So you can find things about that. But also, if there's articles about a business, if your ancestor was the owner of the business or someone important who worked there, they might be mentioned in information about the business. So then you can find out more about what they did. Again, as we saw a little while ago, I have information about where they went to school. So it doesn't happen so much these days, but particularly in the late 19th, early 20th centuries, oftentimes newspapers would list graduates of schools or, might also list special activities. Again, that also might be charitable organizations. Oftentimes I've seen paid sections, particularly in the 50s, these are very big, where they would list all of the people who were voted to the royal court at a dance. So it'd be like Snow Queen or Princess and stuff like that. Might also have information about where they lived, including addresses. So as someone here earlier mentioned, fires. If the place where they lived was involved in a fire, you can find information on that. And that's also leads me to another thing. If you're having trouble finding someone based on their name, try searching for their address in case something happened there that got reported on. That's always something you can do. Like if there was a fire, a flood, if there was a break-in at a business where they worked, I found articles for people because their business was robbed or they were a police officer that responded to a crime or something like that. You can find them that way. So we have along those lines, we have a couple of really good comments in here. Brenda is saying, I've had good results looking at Chronicle America for social commentary, parties, gifts, visiting families and friends. Jenny is saying there was a fight within my family described in the paper. It was comical. Yes. So those are all the sorts of things. It's not always serious and just obituaries and formal events. You can find some really funny stuff. Not necessarily funny, but I was able to find out an interesting fact about one of my grandparents. My father's mother was arrested and tried and convicted for adultery in 1947, which I, again, found fascinating. I don't know if she actually went to prison. She was sentenced to 6 months. I don't know if that actually happened, but she was found guilty of adultery, which was, I guess, still prosecutable offense back then. So I thought that was pretty interesting. So that brings us to the end of my slides here. So if you have any questions, I am available for a little while here. If you think of anything later, you can also email us, call us, or go into the live chat. So I think we have a couple of questions that came in. Let's go back here. So yeah, everyone pretty much figured out who that guy was. All right. Okay, so Penelope is asking, are there 19th century, assuming that you meant 19th century trade newspaper publications for butchers, how would I even find this out for a city like Brooklyn? So that's where the Library of Congress directory is going to be really useful. You could, again, I would say try by location first and see if something comes up there. We also have resources here where we can try to figure that out. We have different directories that have been published for many, many years that we can try looking that up and seeing if there was anything early. I would try the Library of Congress. And also, if you know it was something in Brooklyn, I would also try contacting the Brooklyn Public Library to see what they have. That's something I always recommend. If you're researching someone from a particular place, try contacting the library there. They will have the best knowledge of what exists there for them. Okay, let's see. Did we have anything else? Okay, so Carol's saying, I'm new to this. Is this available from the BPL website or do I need to go into a branch? So we do have a lot of, let's just get here. We do have a lot of databases that you can use from home. You don't need to come in for all of them. So we're just gonna try to get back there. So you go to BPL homepage, which is bpl.org. Then you click on Learning and Research, then Online Resources, and then Newspapers. So you can see here, most of these you'll be able to use from home. So you do need to have a BPL library card or an e-card. You can get an e-card on our website and we'll look at that in a moment, but these are all the ones you can use from home. And for newspapers, the only one you can't use from home, I believe, is Harper's Weekly. The rest of them you can use them all from home. So if you don't have a physical BPL card yet, what you can do is you can go up to our website and get an e-card. So again, you go to bpl.org and then services, then down here, click on e-cards. And you click on this big button over here, register or renew an e-card. So anyone who lives, works, goes to school, or owns property in Massachusetts can get an e-card. You do not have to live in Boston and you do not have to travel to a Boston location if that's what you want to do, if you're more focused on looking at the databases. However, if you do live close enough to one of our locations where you can get a physical card, I do recommend that. But if you can't, then the e-card works for all of those newspaper databases but one, and that's Harper's Weekly. Okay. So Lynn is asking, does putting quotation marks around the name, if possible, narrow down the search? Yes, it does. I'm just gonna just show an example here. It's especially useful for common names. Back to the globe. Newspapers. So I'm just gonna, let's go back here. There we go. Okay. Okay, so you can see here, so when I put John Fitzgerald in there, it was John Fitzgerald. I mean, there's going to still be a lot of results because it's a really common name, but so you get about 6,700 results with the name in quotes. But if you were to take it out of quotes, see here, you get over 48,000 results. So I definitely recommend putting a name in quotes. However, just keep in mind, sometimes names are misspelled, so that might not necessarily work. You might have to run a few different searches to get all the different spelling variations in. But yes, I do recommend putting a name in quotes, particularly if it's a really common name. If the person has an uncommon name, either first or last, then that's less necessary. You don't necessarily need to put quotes around it, but if it's a really common name like John Fitzgerald, I definitely recommend quotes. Okay, so Linda's asking about, would like to search the Worcester Telegram Gazette or the Bar Mass paper online at BPL. We do not have access to those online, unfortunately. We only have those in microfilm. So the Worcester Public Library might have something online. I'm not sure about Barry, but I can tell you we don't have those online. We do not have all newspapers online. That's either because they just haven't been digitized. It costs money to digitize newspapers, and we don't have enough to digitize everything that we have, unfortunately. Or it could be that it's only available in a resource that we do not have access to. Unfortunately, we can't get all of the databases that have everything that's available. It's just not feasible for us. But definitely feel free to send us an email and we can try to figure out if we have it or who does have it if we don't. Okay, so let's see. So Sylvia is talking about we have an ancestor in England who was a poet who listed reviews of his work, but only the publication, no date or volume. Some of these were on microfilm only and I struggled to find them. Yes, that's unfortunate because like I said, there are a lot of really great resources for newspapers, but not everything is digitized and not everything that we have microfilm for has an index. So you are sometimes just going to have to do manual searching. Okay, so Christopher's asking, yes, this is being recorded and I will be sending a link to the recording to everyone once it's available, hopefully by the end of the week, but our AV people are very busy folks, so it may be a little while, but I will get that up to you as soon as I possibly can. Okay, so that's it for what's in the chat right now. So we still have a few minutes, but if anyone has any other questions, feel free to pop them into the chat. And if you think of something later, again, you can always email us to ask@bpl.org. You can also call us. The phone lines are open Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. If no one answers the phone, just please leave a message and someone will call you back. I promise you we will. It just might be a little while. Our lovely phone operator is unexpectedly out for a while, so it's taking us a little longer to get to phone calls, but we do listen to every single voicemail we get and we do respond to all of them. So please leave us a message if you don't get to a live person on the phone. You can also use the live chat, which is available Monday through Friday through our website from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. So if you were to visit this link here, this button will be live and you can click on that. You can send us a question and a librarian will respond to you. Okay, so there don't seem to be any more questions coming in. So we're going to go with, let me see. We do have something. So Brenda's asking, I'm researching an ancestor who had a restaurant in Scully Square from 1910 to 1940. How would you suggest I research it? So if you know the name of the restaurant, you could try putting that in. If you don't, you could try putting in your ancestor's name. Or like I said, if you know the address, you could put that in. However, those are really only useful if you know those things. So if you don't, what I would actually suggest you do is look in the city directories, which is another resource we have, and find the address for that, because it would probably be listed in the city directories, which is a whole nother resource that we have. Oh, you don't? Okay, so you're saying I don't know the name or anything. Okay. So I would definitely suggest you send us an email with as much information as you do know, and we will get back to you and we will see what we can find, and then we will get back. That's something we'd have to do a little bit of digging on. So yeah, send us an email with whatever you do know, the name of the relative that owned it would be good if you know that. Anything you can tell us about it, and we will do what we can. So Paul is asking, what about finding baseball teams that played in the North End during World War II? So that is something, again, try searching by the name of the team. You might have to use different variations. It's also important that you find out the name of the team that you type that in right, because baseball teams change their names sometimes. North End. So, that's pretty interesting. So yeah, so if you're looking specifically for newspaper articles, try, just searching for the name of the team, or if you know anyone who played for that team, type in that person's name. Oh, you don't know any names. Okay, well, that might be a little trickier. So then what you could do, yes, so Len is suggesting maybe the North End had a local paper. So we can actually, this is a perfect example of this. So what you might need to do if you're looking for things in databases, maybe just try typing in try a specific day or time period and just type baseball and see what comes up for baseball. So we have someone who is researching pre-Negro League baseball teams. And so we've been looking some of those up. And so we've actually done a little bit of this lately, but for an earlier time period than World War II. So, oh wait, that's not where I meant to go. Okay, so for the North End, so we're gonna go to research guides. And okay, click on all guides. And go down here to newspapers. There's a link to this, don't worry, so you don't have to go through all that. Okay, so let's see, historical newspapers, microfilm. So in this case, we're going to look at the Boston neighborhood newspapers list. Okay, so we're looking for North End in the 1940s. Okay, so unfortunately, it looks like we don't have any newspapers from the North End in World War II. So again, I would just go back to just find the sports section in a newspaper and see if it was mentioned. That's about what you could try. There's also, again, if you want to send us an email, there's other resources available that we can check for you, as we have a few baseball almanacs and books related to baseball that we can try looking at for you. So Carrie's asking what information is in the Irish Times. So the Irish Times was a newspaper. Let me see. Let's see. So what years? Okay, sorry, did the wrong thing again. Here we go. Let's go back. So that's in Procrest Historical Newspapers. That is basically what it sounds like. It was published. Let me see if I can find out what the description said. U.S. newspaper, international newspaper. There we go. So it goes back from 1859 to 2021. So it was published in Ireland. So basically, it's just a general newspaper, and it focuses on the Irish in Ireland. So that's basically what it was. It's a regular newspaper. It wasn't very specific to a neighborhood or anything like that. You can see like the masthead here is published in 1913. Is published in Dublin. So it's an Irish newspaper. So it would have whatever information would be in a newspaper at that time. So it is particularly useful because it covers the time of the Troubles, and also from the turn of the century, the era of the IRA and all that sort of thing. So that's the Irish Times. Right. So I'm just going to, again, so once again, for everyone who's still here, this was recorded. Everyone will be getting a link to the recording. You'll also be getting a follow-up email from me tomorrow with links to the handout, the class slides, and the chat. So if you missed anything, you will be able to get that. So our next class is on December 20th. We'll be talking about vital records and using vital records to research your ancestors. And in a couple weeks, we have a guest speaker, Rich Venezia, talk about naturalization records. So if that's something you're interested in, there's also be information about that in the email tomorrow, so you can go ahead and check on that. So I guess just thank you everyone for coming. We really appreciate having such a good audience. You're asked some wonderful questions. If you think of anything you didn't get a chance to ask, or if you think of something later, feel free to reach out to us, or you can also email me. And I hope everyone has a good rest of your evening and a good weekend.